And on behalf of the museum, we are excited to have recently installed, after several pandemic delays, innovators in Southwestern jewelry, with Pat's necklace as a central highlight. The installation celebrates the late 20th and 21st century artists who have and are creating jewelry that combine their personal vision and techniques and the traditions of their communities and elders. I would like to recognize the work of Dr. Adriana Green, consulting curator on the installation and curator of Indigenous Arts of the Americas at the Fralin Museum of Art at the University of Virginia, as well as Monisha Bernard, curatorial assistant, and the exhibition team, Tim Wittenberg and Colin Metalsmith. They all contributed greatly to this installation, and I hope you'll be able to come visit in person. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Pat Pruitt, an innovative contemporary artist of Laguna, Chiricahua, Apache, and Anglo descent, who has made a powerful impact on current American jewelry. He has won many awards from Native American juried art competitions, as well as medals at the Couture Jewelry Awards and from the American Craft Council. Pat's work is included in museum collections spanning Europe, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And most importantly of all, Pat is an engaging, thoughtful, and continuously evolving artist. Tonight, he will speak about his work. And as part of the museum's commitment to expand the stories told through contemporary Native American jewelry, my predecessor, Ulysses Grant Dietz, commissioned Pat's necklace, which is featured, as I've said, in the new installation. Picking up the conversation with Pat as he completed the necklace has been a fascinating experience. And with that, welcome, Pat.
Well, thank you, Amy. I appreciate you. I appreciate that awesome, amazing introduction. I think it's probably one of the best introductions I've ever had in my quasi-illustrious career. So thank you for that. And many thanks to the museum, the Newark Museum. Thanks to you listen to Dietz, correct? I'm trying to remember how to pronounce his name, because this journey was a long journey getting here. It spanned years, because I think we all understand that museums move at a glacial pace sometimes, and it's very interesting to see how institutions work. But just want to say I'm glad to be here. So thank you for having me. And so where we're going to start with, by the way, we had some technical issues. We're going to be talking about some of the work that led up to the particular piece that the Newark Museum now has in their collection. So I think it's going to be an interesting little oral journey with some pretty pictures along the way. And so, just as you all know, my name is Pat Pruitt. I'm a Native American metalsmith based out of New Mexico and Oklahoma these days. So it's actually a pretty interesting space to be in. I've been doing jewelry for quite some time. And in the beginning, as we start going through this presentation, that I really got my start doing traditional silver work. And I was fortunate to study under Greg Lewis and Charlie Bird, who are two silversmiths within the village of Powati, in which I live in. And so I've been very gracious to have been taken under both of their wings to learn traditional stamp work, right? Like your traditional Southwestern style of jewelry. And I think very early on, I had a very unique and simple design sense, as you kind of can see in these two early bracelets that I had done in years back, trying to refine and be really simplistic in the design, which I've come to find. I found out at a much later age that being very simple is being difficult. So I did that for a short period of time, and then kind of moved on, got into college, started studying mechanical engineering, and got involved in the body jewelry industry. And that's what was pretty fascinating, is making jewelry for piercings at the time. And this was my introduction into working with stainless steel and titanium. And I came into working with another metal, zirconium, later. But in this particular field, it was pretty fascinating, because we were really dealing with a lot of metals that no one had really used. Right, we were developing and designing jewelry based on some Aboriginal designs, much like these Dayak ear weights, from a tribe out of Borneo. And then as in the next slide, we start getting into innovating some designs with like some spirals out of stainless steel and moving into using alternative materials early on in that career, such as like casino dice, right? In the jewelry that we use, because it was adornment. You had to, I shouldn't say you wanted to look good, which was a pretty neat aspect to it. And throughout this industry, what was pretty fascinating was that we were so committed to these metals, right? Because people reacted. You were working with jewelry that was going to go in places to make themselves feel beautiful, make themselves feel powerful. And as the materials started to become more readily available, we started getting into doing some cool things with semi-precious stones like industrial diamonds on this particular set of eyelets that were made for a dear friend of mine who had his ears stretched up quite large. And so it was a fascinating journey. I spent about a decade and a half, a little longer or so in that industry, and really acquired and got some amazing skills, both in design and in fabrication. And as that particular industry kind of faded out, I started getting into the work that I'm doing today, which is kind of my current work. And I say current because it's relative to, I started about 2006. And instead of getting back into doing traditional adornment out of silver and gold, I stay committed to these metals, working out of titanium and stainless steel and zirconium. And I had a very good blessing in that my younger brother, Chris, also got into the jewelry realm, but his specialty was doing lapidary work. So if you see stones that are in my work, I'd say 90% of the time it's the work of my brother, which I'm proud of him. And, we make a great team when we start doing work. So as we start moving through some of these pieces that are over time, right? Like you start developing different techniques and different processes based on, I think, the resource that you have at hand, and whether that resource is something that you just have access to or it's tooling that you buy. It's pretty fascinating to see how that impacts your design aesthetic and the way you fabricate stuff. And so I say this because leading up to this particular necklace that we're going to be talking about in a little bit, I've been very fortunate to have, in my own studio, 3-axis CNC machining centers, some really nice manual tooling. And then we started getting into laser welding, laser marking, and having the ability to construct in methods that were similar to jewelers, but also very different for the materials at hand. And so it allowed me to start constructing in different spaces and at different scales. And I think talking about scale is also very important because, I get to work with these materials in a very different realm, in the sense that, like, I'm not restricted by cost of materials, which is also a really nice thing. So being able to do larger bolo ties like this one shown, or as in we see in the next slide, some zirconium bracelets that we see, talking scale and talking design, I get to play around and do some really unique things and learn some amazing stuff. And so part of this particular necklace that we're going to be talking about is it's really that culmination of all these skills, right? All these techniques that I've been able to amass over the years. And I can't say I perfected them because I'm still learning quite a bit, but being able to use them in ways in which I feel are unconventional. It's unconventional that we're even using these materials, but being able to combine these materials and reflect back on some traditional motifs, traditional design principles, and leading us to this amazing image of the necklace that the museum now has in its collection, which I feel, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong and chime in, that this was probably about a 4 or 5 year process that we got into, and we can start talking about that. So what do you say?
I definitely agree. I think it was 3 or 4 years. So lots of labor and love and knowledge embedded in it.
Right. So as we start talking about this particular piece, I think we should. There's the start, and then there's the start of the story, right? Well, we already started,
Right,
so now
right.
it's the start. Now it's the start of the story, right? So I remember distinctly when Ulysses contacted me. What was it? It was kind of in a roundabout way,
Right.
because he actually worked with a gentleman to like, hey, we're going to be boning up our collection, and he had some ideas, which is pretty neat because me and Ulysses, unbeknownst to me, we were in the same place at the same event in New York, just years ago. And this was really early on in my career. And it was the Couture Awards, in which I was very fortunate to actually win that particular competition with a set of rings I had designed at that time. And little did I know it would evolve to this, right? Like literally decades later, and how it all like comes full circle. And so I had a phone call with the Ulysses a while back, a couple of days ago. I was like, give me some backstory, because I never heard your side of the story.
Right.
And he was just enamored, right? Like he was just enamored with the work, and how I guess how strikingly different it was at the time, and how it just continued to be different, because at that point he's just kind of following me and stalking on Facebook and Instagram, because that's what we all do today, right?
Right, right. But it
We
was
find an
very,
interest, and we
go
so
ahead, sorry.
yeah, no, and so it was interesting, because it took, I mean, like, I don't even remember how long it was since we had met, for that process to go, but I want to say it was like 5 or 6 years
Hmm.
before then the contact started happening. And as we started talking about um what was wanted, and it was very clear that he wanted like a squash blossom um for the collection, but that was it. Like that was like from me. Like he
Right,
identified
right.
me as like, I want a squash blossom from you, because I think at this time I had done quite a few of them. There had been a number of them. I would say a few, like 3 or 4, right? Like at the time, because they are pretty labor intensive. And I was like, well, what do you want, right? Like, what's the idea and concept? And he's like, I don't know. That's you.
Right, right. Bring your skills.
Yeah, bring your skills. And so that was I think that was the highlight of it, right? Is that like, it's like he didn't there was zero restraints, other than, well, really there wasn't any, other than stay in this, make it a necklace. That was it, make it a squash blossom. So
Right.
so as we start talking about the squash blossom, right? And as we move forward into the slides, we started talking about the process of how this was all to happen, right?
Right.
And as with anything, it starts off with a sketch. And that's what is at the leftmost side, is like kind of those. This is probably about a third or fourth generation of sketch, right? Because I had actually gone through a number of different iterations of what the blossom should be. And I knew I wanted a challenge. And up until that point, I had never done a necklace that had like a dual set of beads,
Ah,
which poses its own challenge, because you have different attachment mechanisms, and figuring out how it's all going to lay out. But it then just starts with making beads, right? So that's what these other slides are illustrating, is stamping the beads or cutting the discs out, and then you manually hand form all these beads. And as we get into the next series of images, you start seeing how these beads come together,
mhm.
right? So we start welding them together. There's some grinding that's going on, to get them nice and smooth. And then as we start moving forward, you can already see the change in the design from the original sketch on the previous slide. It was really, I wanted to bring like a tech factor to this, to
Mhm.
like, okay, if we were to do a squash blossom in the year like 2023, right? Well, that's this year. Let's just say 23, 23. That far into the future, right? Like it's like in the year 1999. It's
Right,
like that's
right,
how
right.
that's how far we've gone. So, so it's one of those things that, how far. It's like that's the thing. Um, and so I wanted it to have like a super kind of like a techie feel, but you still got it. And
Yeah.
this is where I started running into the issues of Okay, I've got like a dual row of beads I got to contend with, and how do I, how do I attach these? How do I bring it all together? And so you
Right.
just start seeing the layout format, the layout issues that I'm having. And as we start moving into the next slide, I started incorporating like the laser work and doing designs. Like you see this like really nice hexagonal patterning. You start
Mhm.
seeing the little cutouts forming on the side. But more importantly, and I think if you look at that center image, there was a trick on getting these beads to sit correctly because they have two different radiuses, right? As they pan along. And so you have to space them out so visually it looked correct, even though they're the same size bead on both strands. And that was I think that was one of the biggest challenges. Like, how do I keep these things spaced out? And it's like, well, I'm gonna invent this cool little trick on like just creating the space I need in the little piece I'm gonna weld onto the back of it. You're never gonna see it, right? Like people are gonna wear it. They'll be like, wow, that laid out perfectly. And it's like, there was a trick to all of this.
No, it
And so
took some doing.
it took some doing. And yeah, and so you get to see like how things are gonna lay out. And eventually it all kind of came into play, and as these pieces started,
Mhm.
I guess, coming to fruition on their own, right? Like all the beads are starting to get done, all the cabling will start to get cut to length, and all the squash blossoms themselves were being fabricated. Everything just started lining up. And as we start seeing in these next series of slides, which is kind of more the finished aspect of what was happening, right?
Mhm.
It's like we have these individual components that are all getting put together and assembled, and it really was that culmination of not only like those manual skills that I learned, years and years and years ago, from Charlie and Greg, but it also had a lot of the engineering that I learned. It also had a lot of the new technology with cutting things out on the CNC mill, as well as using two very my puppy dog's in here, and she's getting in my cabling. Um, so um, and so it's it was really neat to see all that happen over in this particular piece, right?
Right,
Because
right.
you had the machining, and then we started to do the laser engraving, and now I've got another material, zirconium, that I can throw in there just to get the offset of the black. And it was amazing. It was quite fascinating to see how all this came together. And I had posted the image of this next slide, right, which was taken by one of your photographers,
Right,
and it blew me away because I wasn't able to photograph it at that level,
right.
and it just came together, and it just worked in a way that I don't think it could have been better planned, right? And it was just keep crunching away, and working through the problems, working through the issues, working through the time. And I'm very grateful for you guys, right? The museum of being very patient with me, because I
Mhm.
know it was an interesting period of time for me as well. And then we get into COVID. So
Right,
it's,
right.
so like everything just kind of happened all at once. But your photographer did an amazing job. So kudos to them. and
Oh,
uh, and and thank you as well for giving me the ability to kind of flex and to kind of show what I can do, and to be able to give you guys hopefully something that is a statement piece for the museum, and that you now have it on exhibition, and hopefully
right.
people will come and visit and check it out firsthand.
Well, we've had lots of responses because your necklace is the signature object on the web page, and in all of our email that go out, it's one of the banner images, and there's lots of powerful response. And I think, thank you so much for describing how your life journey is embedded in the journey of you
Mhm.
designing, thinking about, and then figuring out how to put it all together. And I do remember when we started talking early on, you talked about, well, I had this great idea with the beads, but they're really pushing me to the test, because in the previous image you showed the punch, or there was a glimpse for people who recognize it as like a metal punch there in the center to cut the diameter. And I was just wondering if you could, what pressure is that? What physical labor does it take to cut through this steel, and then weld it and buff it? Thinking about all of that, because it's a machine tool, but there's a lot of handwork in there. So if you could speak to that a little bit more for everyone.
Okay, yeah, I can, Amy. I think so the center image is illustrating the cutting tool, right? And in the industry they call it a disc cutter because it literally cuts out discs. And you're generally using a softer metal, so you can just hit the end of that point with a hammer, and it cuts through the metal, giving you a disc. The material I was using for these particular beads was stainless steel, and I'm sorry, you can hit it with a hammer all you want. You're going to get kind of the way through it, but probably not all the way through it. And so I used a 20-ton hydraulic press to actually like punch through it, like set it up in there, and use the power of hydraulics, right? Like that's the nice thing, is that like you can exert 20 tons of force, without lifting a finger, because the pump is doing all the work for you.
Right.
And so, yeah, so you then have to calculate, and I don't even think I counted the number of beads on this particular necklace, but I want to say it's pretty close to 100.
Right.
So to do 100 beads, you need 200 halves, right? Because each bead takes 2 pieces.
Right.
And so you end up with a bunch of half beads, because after you punch the disc out, then you got to dish it, right? You got to give it the bead shape. And after you do that, then you got to kind of sand it. You got to get the edges fitting right, like so they fit together properly. And then you start welding it along the seams. And it really is a welding process. One of the nice things that kind of came into the industry as my journey through the jewelry industry progressed. One of the things, I was actually up in Minneapolis at the Jewelry Symposium this past weekend, and this is a symposium in which like a lot of technical minded people come in, and they'll present papers on like structural properties of new alloys and like casting techniques of new alloys, and they bring all this new industry, like they talk technically about the industry. And one of the things that came into this industry not long ago was what they call pulse arc welding, which is TIG welding, right? Like a tungsten inert gas that is pretty, for people who weld, is a pretty common welding process, in which they were able to basically reduce the amperages so you can weld at a smaller scale. And do it in a controlled manner, so you can go super tiny, super precise welds using this available technology that was originally designed for the tool and die industry. And so you bring this technology into the industry, and that's what allows me to like weld stainless steel. And then as things get further along, lasers come into the picture. And so you have like the ability to laser weld stuff together, which now that blows me away, because that's just the power of light. Right? It's amplified light to weld and to do some cool things. And so you literally just weld the 2 halves together, drill a hole in it, and boom, there's your bead. and then you do it a number of times. So because you need multiples.
Get those beads. Well, that's great. And in fact, someone named Sean asked about welding. So you've already gone through the pulse arc, the laser welding, and so much of this technical machine tooling skills being used, and those are also jewelry. skills, but it's just you thank you for answering the question in advance. And I do have another one from Jim Olson, who also says hello and says it's amazing that your work is in the Newark Museum of Art and the British Museum and many others, yet people can buy and wear your work every day. So these larger works are clearly time consuming, and how do you keep that balance between these large scale museum pieces, museum works, and jewelry for sale?
Oh, that's a great question. I think fundamentally as a studio artist, um, you reach the point on which you, or maybe you don't reach. Maybe I think you kind of evolve and you discover that there's the things we want to make, right? That are just like pie in the sky, like I want to make this. And that's not necessarily what sells.
Right.
Right. Like just being on, and then you find out like, oh crap, I've got to make stuff that sells. Right. So and when you say sell, like you've got to hit a number of price points, right? Because in the jewelry industry, everybody's at different levels. And so I think over time you kind of get a firmer grasp of, okay, I got to do these things because that's what sells and that's what pays the bills. If you're a full-time artist, which I am, right? Like I don't have any other profession. And then I've been very fortunate that through, I think, a lot of the shows that I do, in which there is prize money, being able to create the larger pieces that do allow you to express yourself from a personal level, from a technical level, from a creative level. I mean, like, being able to create new things. And I think also I try to take those opportunities to like chat, like from a challenge, like I want to do something I've never done before, which, you try hard enough and you're going to find it, and this, so this piece was like that. So Jim, thank you for the question. I think you evolve over time to find that if that's your profession, right? I mean, like I wish I could say like, oh yeah, I build showpieces all the time. And no, I don't. I mean, like I'll make 200 pairs of earrings because, well, I got to pay the bills. So I mean, like there's that, right? There's the
So
humbleness.
you have to keep that balance. Yep.
Yes.
Well, and thinking about the materials as well, as you've talked about kind of these new materials, or at one point they were unconventional jewelry materials. I think you've made them more, not every day, but a little bit more seen as you've opened people up to the understanding of these materials. And so one person says, have you done work for the movies? This reminds me of Black Panther with the vibranium. And Christine Nelson wanted to ask specifically, are the beads niobium or titanium? So
okay. Well, hey Christine, good seeing you. Thanks for joining in. She's a bro down in the Phoenix Mesa area, and she's a maker herself too, so she understands all of this. The beads are neither; they're actually done of stainless steel, which poses their own challenge. I have done titanium beads. I have not done niobium beads, which I think one of these days maybe I'll jump into that metal. And as far as like, have I done work for movies? No. I think that would be really cool. I think I don't know if I would love it or not, because I think part of it is like, most jewelry in the industry are props. Right. So it's not like real jewelry in that sense, but they do hire real designers to design them, and I think as with any industry, as long as you can achieve the look within the visuals, that's what they're shooting for. But I've been very, very blessed to be compared to the artist Dorian, I believe is her name. I think she's out of California, who was a designer for the Black Panther and that line of work, and she does some amazing stuff. So being compared is always an honor, right? It's like, yeah, cool.
And speaking of shows, another person wants to know if you like the show Forged in Fire, which sounds like lots of welding and metal work there.
It's actually a pretty cool show. I've had a number of friends who've been part of it. I've run kind of in the knife maker crowd. I make knives on occasion,
Hmm.
but I'm not a forger, right? I mean, like
Right,
I'm just not built enough for that because I think you just have to have like the strength of the work
right,
to wield
right.
those hammers. And plus I'm getting up there, right? I'm 50 now, and I don't want to hurt myself. I think,
Right.
like, I'm going to be honest, you know.
Right. Well,
It's just,
I think
it's
that's
like, well,
with age comes wisdom, so you know your limits most of the time.
yeah,
So that's great. And it is interesting thinking, all these different ways of working with metal. So forging and
right.
casting but here I have another question from Peggy Sint. I want to honor everyone, and please do send in more questions if anyone has. But Peggy Sint wants to know if your studio is still in your home, or I know you've been moving recently and changing gears, so maybe that's not true, but anymore.
No, yeah, yeah, yes, it's actually the home in New Mexico. So
Hmm.
I still have the studio space there. I'm still acquiring equipment and new resource to build some cool things. And then my partner and I, we bought a house here in Oklahoma. So I
Hmm.
think part of it is also, being able to outfit the space here. So
Right.
that way, when I am out here, to be able to continue work. And while it may not be like at the level of work I can do in New Mexico,
Hmm.
I think the nice thing is that, as you get older, you see the evolution of the technology and how it changes and what kind of equipment you can, like what I can buy now versus what I was able to get 10 years ago or 15 years ago is different. And
Right.
so I think you can create a very different work environment and still be able to create some unique things, even though it may not be what the other studio has. And
Right.
so, so I think it's going to be interesting to see where that's going to go. I mean, I'm actually looking forward to seeing, like, all right, what can you do with less? I mean, I'm a firm believer that your design is paramount, and how you achieve that design is merely a function of resource and technique, right?
Right.
So, I mean, like, I always encourage other, like, silversmiths especially, or other
Mhm.
artists, and I do this from on occasion, is
Mhm.
I try to do like line studies, right?
Mm.
Like, how far can you go with just a simple line?
Right, right.
And it's pretty amazing, like what you can do just with a singular line, and how far it goes, because it then helps you transcend and evolve into doing more and more complex pieces, much like this necklace,
Right,
right?
right.
Because once you start exploring these different avenues, um, fundamentally your design process comes out, and fundamentally, like, I would like to say, your persona also comes out
Mhm.
into the work, and so you start seeing, for those of you who've been in the art industries long enough, you can then start to recognize people's work
Right,
just
right.
sheerly by what it is, right?
Right, it
And,
becomes
and
their personality is it's all intertwined. And then actually we have two questions about design for you. So
yeah,
just following with that thought, one person asked what inspires your designs, landscape or geometry? You were talking about the line. And then Natalie Bailey says, does a design begin with a material or a design element, kind of chicken or the egg? So I guess the first question is what inspires your design, and the second is where do you start, with the material or with the design idea?
I think inspiration comes from your life path.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a very firm believer of that. I mean, being able to, I think, like, being able to travel, being able to go see things, personal things may happen in your life. We now have, instantaneous access to the entire world, right, through our phones. That I think inspiration can come from anywhere. I think we're very fortunate that how am I going to say this? I think as a designer, we're very fortunate that we have a myriad of tools now to be able to document our inspiration, right? Like we've got our phones, we've got all this tech. We still have pencil and paper too, but nobody uses that, right? Everybody just sketches on their computers. But no, I
Although
mean, like,
I did see a slide a few minutes ago with some
yeah,
pencil
I mean,
sketches.
I'm actually old school. I still sketch via pencil and paper, right? Or a pen or a marker or whatever. I mean, like, but that's my fluidity, right? Like I can sketch easier that way. And so like I'll pull inspiration from anything. I mean, it's one of those things that like I did a bracelet years ago in which I was working on my car because I had to like, I don't know, replace the fan belt or the alternator belt or something like that. And I was like, the alternator pulley is actually pretty cool. Like just the V grooves on it. And so I basically just stole, the V groove pattern on the alternator, and it looked great because it was this utilitarian aspect that you can then bring into an arena of beauty
Right.
in which I think there's just that industrial design. So I think I'd like to say inspiration can happen anywhere, and I
Right.
think that's the beauty behind being able to do the work that I do, and I think having the ability to take that inspiration and morph it into whatever it becomes, then kind of leads into the next question, right? Is like, where's the chicken and the egg, right? Like, what is the design? Is it the materials? Is it what you're designing? um I think it's yes, like to all of the above, right? Because
Yes.
I look at it from a perspective of part of my journey when I was starting to do this work and getting into doing the traditional adornment, like this current phase of work.
Right.
um, I was familiar with stainless steel and titanium, right? And so that was what I knew at that time. And I was like, I don't want to relearn silver and I don't want to relearn gold. And the fascinating thing that came out of it is that understanding just the physical properties of these materials, right? Like, because stainless steel and titanium and zirconium have very unique physical properties and
Mm-hmm.
unique characteristics that silver and gold or platinum don't have. And so you can do different things with them. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can set stones in a way you've never set them before, or you can create a piece using like a minuscule framework because the materials are so strong, right? So
Right.
like it allows you to do things, and I think any artist who is familiar with their materials that they use can exploit those materials. Like, and I use the term exploit because
Mm-hmm.
I can do things that nobody else can do, not because I'm me, but because the materials allow me to do that, right?
Right.
So yeah,
Hmm.
so I think before, yes, chicken and the egg. I don't think there's a or there. I think
Right.
it's a chicken
Right.
and the egg. It's like just run with it, just embrace all of it.
Yep.
Because because now we're in an era in which we are now coming into, we're now in an era in which I don't think fabrication like is going to be an issue too much longer, right? Because
Right.
we have
Right.
the tools, the technology, the, and I don't know what you want to call it, the ability to manufacture. And that's what was fascinating about this symposium that I went to, is you're learning about the bleeding edge of
Right.
technology, right? Like what do you mean I can direct print palladium? You know what I mean? Like,
That's
okay, cool.
amazing.
Like, yeah. So it's pretty interesting and pretty fascinating. And yeah, so we'll see where design goes next.
Well, that's exciting. And I have another question, and we'll see if we have any. I think we may have time for one more after that, but kind of building on this, yes, and all of the above. Natalie wanted to know, do you find restrictions a negative or a plus? And I guess it depends on how you define restrictions. Is your equipment not working that day, or is a client telling you that they don't want something, but how would you respond to, do you find restrictions a negative or a plus?
I think the restrictions for me would be like, is the power out, right? Like that's a huge restriction for me. Like I can't really work without power to a certain point.
Right.
I've gotten to that point, right? Um, I want to try and read into the question a little bit, because I think restrictions are probably based around in this context
Mhm.
of, what is the perception of Native American jewelry or Native
Right,
American art, right? And
right,
so I think historically, Native American art, for whatever reason, has been categorized or has been put into
right,
boxes, right,
right,
of definition, like what does this mean?
right,
And so I think the restrictions are, does it fit this definition, or is it outside the confines of that? And therefore, do we need to describe a bigger box now? Right?
right,
Like that's the restriction.
right,
I think every good artist is always going to evolve and is always going to create, and it's not up to them to define it,
right,
right? It's going to be those institutions that find the need to define it, to find a new definition,
right.
right? Because I think when we start talking about, because people have taught to me, because I do such contemporary work, is, we're like, what about the traditional artist, right? Well, what about them, right? I mean, for me, traditional is a measure of time,
Right.
and traditional work in my mind, in the context of art, is design. Is it a
Right.
tradition? Like, is it the aesthetic? Like, is
Mm-hmm.
it the aesthetic of the design? Because I can build a very traditional looking bracelet, much like we saw at the very beginning of the slide,
Right.
that I made with a hammer and a stamp and formed it out on a wooden stump. I
Mm-hmm.
can make that exact same thing using a laser and hydraulic presses.
Right. Right. So it
You know,
is. It's yeah. It's the vision and the design.
right.
So
So
wow.
yeah.
I'm starting to repeat you, which you're getting into. This is very exciting, thinking you're getting into my head and thinking about it all. But I do see, unfortunately, the time is, oh, we should probably wrap up. But I think it's kind of like your necklace is a circle. We kind of come full circle, as you said, where you started with your journey, and you and Ulysses being at an event, not knowing each other many years ago, and then coming together, and him giving you this kind of open-ended design challenge, or commission to make your own inspiration from a
Right.
squash blossoms. So I think, as all good conversations, there are more thoughts and questions. And so I think, I'm speaking for everyone who's out there virtually attending. Thank you so much for, kind of opening our minds up to thinking about these new ways of looking and thinking about design and materials. So I could go on for hours talking, but I think, we'll just bring it to a close there, unless you have any final words. But most of all, we just all want to say thank you so much for participating tonight, and with the museum and the installation, and for your work in general.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity again, and thank everybody for being here as well. It's been a fun evening, and yeah, hopefully, everybody goes out and checks out the exhibition. I know next time I'm going to get to New York, I'll make a swing down and come visit you. So we'll make that
Definitely. We
happen.
look forward to it. Great. Well, thank you so much to you, Pat, and to everyone who's listening and watching. Thanks, and have a wonderful night. We look forward to seeing you in Newark soon.